Welcome to Silence Kills. We'll be discussing scientific evidence for a creator and other controversial topics. Here's our hosts, Tom Taylor, Steve Bentley, and Sim Climie.
Hi, welcome to Silence Kills. My name is Sim Climie and Steve Bentley to the right of me, and then over on the other side of the table is Thomas Taylor. And we're going to go over the first law of thermodynamics. And Tom, why don't you start us off with this?
Well, I'll just give a real quick definition. This is the technological correct definition of what you would look up. It says the first law of thermodynamics is a version of the law of conservation of energy adapted for thermodynamic systems. The law of conservation of energy states that the total energy of an isolated system is constant. Energy can be transformed from one form to another, but cannot be created or destroyed. And the last part is really the part that we want to focus in on when we're talking about thermodynamics and the existence of God. That's really why we're talking about it. The law is telling us that all this matter and all this energy that we see in the universe right now, everybody can witness it. It can't be created and it can't be destroyed. It can change state, but the total amount is constant. So now the question, as we back up and we ask ourselves, and everybody asks themselves this question, it's not a new question, is where did all this stuff come from? In the simplest form, where did all this stuff come from? How did it get here? Okay, anybody, and I would encourage you to at home to go do this, can Google where did all the matter and the energy come from? And you can read scientific article after scientific article after explanation of people who would give their opinions about how possibly all this energy and matter could have gotten here. But what you'll soon discover is that nobody knows. The truthful ones, the honest ones who are out there, they'll just simply say, we don't know where all this matter and energy came from. Now you have to make sure that you separate where all the matter and the energy in the universe came from the origins of the matter and the energy in the universe, because you'll get explanations of how possibly this matter that we see, the planets, us as people, you'll see explanations of how the matter could have got here, but they go back to energy that existed before the formation of the universe. So we need to take the question back of origins of energy, origins of matter. Where did the original stuff come from? Now, as Christians, as believer in the Bible, we would say that our Creator, God, created it all. I mean, when we open up the book of the Bible in the Genesis 1:1, it says, in the beginning, God. And so we say the source of everything is God, our Creator God, who is eternal, who has existed forever. Now, if you want to be a naturalist and say there is no God, you by default, in my opinion, you are left with energy is eternal. That's what you're left with. So you have to believe that something is eternal. In the case of no God, you say energy is eternal. It's always existed. Well, you believe that by faith. And I believe by faith that God has always existed because His Word tells us so. But
well, and I think that the significance of why we're talking about this is we really want to look at putting science and faith and reason and putting that all together. I think a lot of times there's a thought process out there that reason and science and faith don't go hand in hand, that they're almost enemies of each other. And I think it's beautiful to look at science, and I think it always points towards God. And it's in Scripture. He said, if you look at creation, you look at my handiwork, you'll see who I am. Yeah. And I think that by studying this, science is really just a search for who God is and how He made things. And I think it's great to dig into this. And so we start with some well-established, well-accepted things that are in science. The first law of thermodynamics, and we're going to talk about some other laws later. And but today, digging into this first law and looking at it, it's really significant to see this accepted law still begs the question. We have this fixed amount. There's only a certain amount. It's never going to change. Well, where did it come from? Mm-hmm. And sometimes we'll find a lot of times in science, to avoid that faith question, it often pushed back further. And you'll find it a lot of adding more and more time to a system to account for it, and that's the magic formula. Enough time. Our magic formula, as we've been accused as faith, as people of faith, is God. Right. But that we believe that He's the eternal. And because there has to be an eternal, because you can only push back so far of saying, well, then there was something before that caused it, and then there was something before that caused. Well, at some point there was something that's always been.
Right.
And when we talked before, we've talked a little bit about the steady state universe concept. That for a while, the scientists were believing that the universe was steady, unchanging, and eternal. And they've come through observation and good scientific method to see that can't possibly be true. It's an expanding universe. Things are changing, and that means it had to have a starting point. It is not eternal. And so all of that stuff, we get in that question. And I think what you said was exactly it. Is what are you going to put your faith in? The science can only take us so far, but there comes a point, and you start moving to philosophy and into theology, and it comes a point where you have a faith question. Are you going to accept by faith that the eternal is God, or are you going to accept that the eternal has to be not God? It has to be something else. And those are faith questions that we dig into. But I think it's great to dig into the truth of creation through science and not be afraid of it and follow it wherever it may take you. I love Jesus. A couple of things he said about truth. One of the things Jesus said, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He said, I am the truth. And another time he said, if you'll search for the truth, you will find it. And I'm like, well, so if anybody gets on a truth journey, they're searching for Jesus. And if they actually find truth, which Jesus said they will, they're going to eventually be led to Jesus. And you see that in the scientific community. They have to be careful about it because they get blacklisted. There's a whole movie that talks about that.
Right.
But you see a lot of scientists are coming to places of faith because as you search for truth and you start to find it, it blows your mind. And
you brought up a good point right there about scientists and educated people with all these PhDs and doctorate. There are a lot of these people who come to the conclusion there has to be some kind of a God, but they're not allowed to say that. They're not allowed to publish that because they will be blacklisted, like you said there. But for people to say that scientists will prove that there is no God, or real scientists don't believe in God, is totally false. But that is something that's promoted as if you believe in God, you don't believe in science, and that's totally false. I mean, God gave us science. Science is really the search for knowledge. One of the simplest definitions of science is knowledge. That's what it is. So what do we know? Okay, and he wants us to keep searching, I would believe, because ultimately, like you said, we're going to find him. Real quick, I want to read a scripture out of Romans 1, the 19th and 20th verse. And it says this, it says, for what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse. And what this verse is telling me is that before science, from the very beginning, when man looks around at the creation, he knows something else has created that there has to be a God. Before Christianity really even came into existence, before Christ, mankind was looking around, and we can go back in history and see this from the Native Americans who would say that there's a sun god or there's a moon god. Different cultures around the country or around the world through history believed that there had to be something out there just by looking at creation itself, and that's what the scripture is saying. God has shown us himself, his invisible qualities, through what he has made. And I think history shows that's true for mankind, that they see something beyond that creation.
And there's times in history, too, where people have made mistakes in their understanding of who God is,
right,
and how he works. They're trying their best to understand the world around. But like I just said about the steady state universe theory, scientists do the same thing. That's science. You come up with an idea, and you investigate and try and prove the idea wrong. And if you can't prove it wrong, it might be right. So you work on all those different theories and digging into that. Yeah, there's going to be mistakes, and I think a lot of times the church and people of faith will be condemned because there's been mistakes, and I think sometimes people of faith have, just like any other person, have gotten defensive about mistakes and about things they've made, and it becomes an argument. But what we're interested in is looking in this together, digging deeper, having a better understanding of how our universe works, how God made it, how it all comes together, and using good scientific principles, the best of our understanding. And I think that's powerful. Sim, you haven't had a chance to share anything.
That's fine. You guys are doing just sharing a truckload of information and opinions, and I've enjoyed it. It's just when you talk about science, knowledge, observation, for anybody to blacklist a scientist who says there's a creator, that doesn't make any sense, because That's just like saying I believe there's a creator of a table. Well, I believe that table, there was a creator of it. Oh, we're going to blacklist you. That tells me that you are not interested in the truth and you choose to walk in a lie and live a delusional life.
I'm ready to go in, Coach. Just give me a chance. I know there's a lot riding on it, but it's all psychological. Just got to stay in a positive frame of mind. I'm going to execute a button hook pattern super slow-mo.
So it's common sense to look at something and go, you know what? Something created that. You know, it's just that simple.
Well, until you can close that door. The door is open. Okay? Yep. Until we can say, this is how this universe came into existence. The door is open. You know, we say that God is an option. There's people that don't want to include that in that option. But we think it's an excellent option. It's a plausible option. It's a reasonable option. For another reason, we believe that is because we believe God has...
Sorry.
For another reason why we believe that, we believe God has revealed himself to us. One, from his creation, but two, in the person of Jesus Christ. Right. So it's not that we just believe all this by blind faith. There are several reasons that line up to say, this is why we believe in God. It's not just because the absence of we don't know how everything got here. It's because there's other reasons that build upon that. His word, Jesus Christ, like you said, the truth. Okay.
And I think, what Sim was saying on that too is so important. When we close, and I think the church has been guilty of that too. When we start to close doors on avenues of seeking truth because of preconceptions, you start to shut down progress, and it's led to bad science. Yep. I've seen bad science, things that you can't do that. It's like the scientific method doesn't allow for you to say that because you don't have the proper proofs in place, you haven't investigated it properly, you haven't done the right things to really be able to proclaim that. But it's also on the other side, if you're trying to make a scientific claim based on out of your faith, you have to use good science there too. And I think it's great. And I mean, you see the earliest avenues of research and science were funded by the church. They were done by theologians. They were done by people searching to understand God's creation before, and sometimes they got blacklisted. When Galileo came up with some of his theories, like, oh, you can't say that because of preconceptions of the church. But that's not because our faith is all wrong. It's just because we're humans and we get stuck and married to our ideas. And we see it happen in the scientific community a lot. And so that's what we really want to explore as we dig into these things. We're going to dig into some of the other laws. We're going to talk about some of these other things. And we really want to dig into a search for truth.
Right.
And being as people of faith, it's okay. Not only is it okay, it's smart to search for truth using science, understanding how God made things. It'll lead you to a deeper, richer faith. I mean, that's when you start digging into the biology of things, and it's almost impossible to come away without saying somebody put this together.